So Pete Buttigieg has dropped out of the 2020 race. This kind of came out of nowhere. Uh, he was still making his case on the Sunday shows, on the Sunday political shows about why he's still in the race, and then he drops out hours later. So kind of weird, but I'm going to dig into it. And really, what this is attempting to do is try and consolidate the so-called moderate vote into one candidate, and that candidate being Joe Biden. But it's not really clear if that's how it's going to work out. And also, as a sort of another aspect of him dropping out, is him trying to help Elizabeth Warren and Amy Klobuchar in their respective states, to enable them to cut into Bernie's delegate lead come Super Tuesday. So let me first show you Pete's tweet here. It says, "Thank you for inviting me into your homes, sharing your stories, and putting your trust in me. We launched our campaign because Americans are hungry for a new kind of politics that brings us together. And together we'll beat this president and build the era that must come next." All right. So look, running for president is hard. I have been critical of Pete Buttigieg because of what he has done and said and his past. So just looking at this completely objectively, you can understand if you follow him from the beginning of the campaign a year ago when he was arguing for Medicare for all, saying that Medicare for all is the compromise. He said this on Morning Joe. I even covered this recently. He called Medicare for all the compromise, and that a national health care service like the UK, that would be an actual left-wing position. And then since then, he has moved completely into the moderate/conservative lane because he realized there was no real support for him with progressives, as Bernie Sanders already had that locked down. So I think it's fair to have been critical of him. That said, if you were a Buttigieg supporter, I'm going to show you some tweets in a minute here of Buttigieg supporters that are moving now to Bernie Sanders. And I think, look, if you actually care about these issues, if you actually care about raising wages, if you actually care about Medicare for all, if you actually care about canceling student debt, if you actually care about dealing with climate change seriously, I think Bernie Sanders is the obvious choice here. So let me look at some polling here. So there's two different polls that really show a very different perspective on who Buttigieg supporters may go to. So a recent Quinnipiac poll shows that second choice of Buttigieg supporters are largely Amy Klobuchar and Warren here, so 26% each. Then Biden at 19, then Sanders at 11, Bloomberg at 9, and 2% don't know. But, okay, so before I move on and show you the morning consult results, which are very different from this one, this is why I think him dropping out is in part, yes, to try and help Joe Biden, but also to try and help Klobuchar and Warren, as right now Bernie Sanders is doing very well in both Minnesota, Klobuchar state, and Massachusetts, Warren state, and could very likely win those states. But with Buttigieg dropping out, I guess the hope there is that the Buttigieg supporters will go to Klobuchar in her state and Warren in her state, and potentially as well, maybe to Warren and Biden, I guess, in California, to try and hit their 15% in that state as well, to try and win delegates, or at least cut into Bernie's delegate lead come Super Tuesday. Because you have to hit 15% statewide to win any delegates. And right now, in a lot of California polls, nobody is hitting 15% except for Bernie Sanders. So, and a recent poll I saw, Warren's at like 14%. So there's a potential here that Buttigieg dropping out could give Warren an extra 1% or 2% in California and have her hit the delegate threshold. But again, all of this is speculation. Anybody that tells you that they know exactly what's going to happen, they don't. Nobody knows, because as I'm going to show you, the polling's all over the place. So Quinnipiac here shows Klobuchar and Warren as as potential places where Buttigieg supporters will go. But morning consults, you look at Buttigieg supporters here, their second choice is Bernie Sanders. And to be fair, it's kind of a three-way tie here. Bernie Sanders, or four-way tie. Bernie Sanders, then Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren at 19%, then Michael Bloomberg at 17%. So it's really not clear where Buttigieg supporters will go, and I think it'll just completely vary depending on the state. As I said, I think in Minnesota, there's a potential that many of them could go to Amy Klobuchar. In Massachusetts, there's a potential many of them could go to Elizabeth Warren. But outside of that, I mean, all of this is speculation, even what I just said just now. I mean, there's a possibility that Buttigieg supporters in Minnesota and Massachusetts will mainly go to Bernie Sanders. So we don't really know. But according to Morning Consult, their second choice is Bernie Sanders. And just to give you a quick overview here, I mean, Bernie's got the second choice for a lot of candidates. So Biden supporters, their second choice is, you can't see the whole thing here, but it's Bernie Sanders with 29%. So a bigger lead there. Warren supporters, their second choice, Bernie Sanders, 40%. Huge here. Which also, you got to begin to question why Elizabeth Warren is still in this race. As Tim Alberta tweets out here, surprised to not see more skepticism of Warren staying in. Losing is one thing, but the manner in which she's headed for defeat, looking hypocritical on super PACs, mocking Bloomberg's height, failing to hit double digits in New Hampshire, Nevada, and South Carolina, does not serve her brand or her future. Which leads me to believe, and this is really a separate video, but leads me to believe that Elizabeth Warren is simply staying in this race to hurt the progressive movement. There is no reason for her to be in this race. She knows she's not going to win. She hasn't won a single state so far. She's barely won any delegates. All she's doing by staying in this race is cutting into Bernie's lead in delegates for the rest of the race, especially in places like California where she could hit 15%, or her home state. So, I mean, it's going to be a separate video at some point, but Elizabeth Warren staying in this race is just hurting Sanders at this point. So if you're still a Warren supporter and you care about you care about the policies, you care about Medicare for all, you care about canceling student debt, you care about climate change, I mean, go down the list, then I think it's time to really think about your vote and consider supporting the candidate in Bernie Sanders who actually has the potential to win here and push these policies forward with this mass movement of people, which in another video, I will show you a glimpse of that. I think 35,000 people that showed up to his rally in LA, just massive amount of people, and the kind of energy you need on the ground in order to win. So there was, again, I don't want to go down this path because this is really about Buttigieg, but just quickly. In 2016, Hillary Clinton did not have that energy. Bernie Sanders did. That energy is necessary if you want people knocking on doors, if you want phone bankers, if you want, individual donations, and ultimately, if you want a candidate that is actually supported by the grassroots, because that candidate will fight for you. That's what Bernie Sanders is. He's a representation of this grassroots movement. So I'm just saying, if you care about the issues, really think hard about your vote. And I think Bernie Sanders is the obvious choice. But based on what I was saying earlier, just the delegate math here. So California is going to be a big one. Bernie's looking really good, as I was saying. But if Warren hits that 15% or Biden hits that 15%, then it's going to cut into how many of these 400 delegates that Bernie actually wins. Same thing with Texas. Bernie's doing very well in Texas right now. But Buttigieg dropping out could potentially boost Biden in Texas a little bit. Or again, we don't know. It could help Sanders. We don't know how it's going to work out. But the states that are a little more, I guess you could speculate a little more clearly on, are Massachusetts, Massachusetts and Minnesota, both Warren and Klobuchar states, where Buttigieg dropping out will likely help them and cut into Bernie's delegate lead after Super Tuesday. Now, let me read you some tweets here. So this is Tina Snow. It says, I feel bad Pete Buttigieg dropped out of the presidential election. He was my guy. That's who I was going to vote for. But I'm going to vote for Bernie now. Hashtag Bernie 2020. So, look, this is clearly anecdotal, but I am seeing a lot of support online or supporters of Buttigieg now moving to Bernie Sanders. I think I got more here. This is Cody Gaddis says, it's official, just dropped off my vote for Bernie Sanders. The last few months, I've been excited that I would be able to vote for Pete Buttigieg, but this vote is too important. I'm sad Pete dropped out, but thankful I still have a candidate to vote for. So that's pretty awesome. And he has a follow-up here saying, P.S. I just got off the phone with my Aunt Julie and Uncle Dale. They supported Pete too and are voting for Bernie. So that's cool to see. Fixing bread prices here says, my dad is a Buttigieg voter. He is now voting for Sanders in the North Carolina primary. And last one here. This is a Bernie supporter, but Dynasty Claire here says, the Bernie campaign is about inclusion. This is a multi-generational and multiracial coalition of working class people. Anybody who wants to join the fight can. I was a Hillary supporter in 2016, and the Bernie community welcomed me with open arms. Let's win this. Hashtag Pete to Bernie. So this is, I think, the perfect overview of what the Bernie Sanders campaign is. It is a multi-generational and multiracial coalition of working class people fighting for a better world. So to all the Buttigieg supporters out there, or Warren supporters, or supporters of any other candidate, now that the fight is really coming down to Bernie Sanders and probably Joe Biden, you really have to think hard about what kind of world you want to fight for. Just think back to what led to Donald Trump. The status quo politics of, being centrist, being moderate, capitulating to Republicans over and over again. The Affordable Care Act, a conservative healthcare platform from the 1990s. Like, you're not going to, if you return back to that era of centrist or moderate politics, whatever you want to call it, you're going to lead to another Donald Trump, because people were not satisfied. Working class people were not satisfied with that. People are swimming in debt, swimming in whether it's student debt, medical debt. People aren't being paid properly. The cost of housing is too high. So you really have to think hard about where you want to see the country in 4-8 years. Because if you just have the status quo again, you're going to lead to another version of Donald Trump. I think it's time now to really take a stand. Fight for a different kind of world. Fight for Medicare for all. Fight for canceling student debt. Fight for higher wages. Fight for dealing with climate change seriously with an actual plan that also takes care of workers in the fossil fuel industry, like Bernie's plan does. In Bernie's plan, if you are a blue-collar worker in the fossil fuel industry and you lose your job because of the transition away from fossil fuels, you are taken care of with full pay for 5 years. This is why Bernie Sanders has a $16 trillion climate change plan, because he actually looks after the workers. All of his plans look after people. They put people first. So again, I think it's important now that Buttigieg has dropped out to kind of refocus on really what this movement, what this campaign is about. And if you know Buttigieg supporters in your lives, maybe friends, family, parents, talk to them and tell them, or first of all, ask them what issues they care about. Make sure you're able to relate to them on what they care about. And then talk about why you support Sanders and maybe why Sanders is best to appeal to their issues. So have these discussions now, because now is the time. Now is the time. If it wasn't before, now is the time to really begin to hunker down and fight like hell for this people-powered movement.